Look at the screen. What you are seeing is not an ordinary scrap heap, but a fiery steel graveyard in Donetsk, where the wreckage of more than 30 Russian war machines is smoldering on a narrow, deadly road. In just a mere 48 hours, a powerful armored force was completely wiped out. Western military experts were forced to exclaim in amazement, "This is the most lopsided ambush since the start of the war." Paradoxically, why did mobile fortresses worth millions of dollars collapse so miserably before cheap drones? Has the era of giant iron fists officially come to an end now that the sky has become an inescapable killer? To understand why Moscow's mechanized power shattered so completely, we need to dissect the fatal mistakes in their operational thinking. To understand why a powerful armored convoy could be turned into heaps of scrap metal in an instant, we must look directly at the thought fossils of the Moscow command. Russia entered the battle with an outdated tactic, overwhelming through sheer mass. They bet everything on an overpowering steel whirlwind, hoping that pure mechanized power and a massive number of tanks would be enough to crush all resistance and pierce the Ukrainian lines with brutal aggression. However, in modern warfare, quantity is no longer an omnipotent shield if it is accompanied by a sluggish nervous system. The first fatal weakness lies in the crumbling chain of command. Intelligence analysis data indicates a shocking figure. It takes the Russian military up to 45 seconds from the moment a target is detected until the order to fire is issued. Remember that on a fiery battlefield where suicide drones fly at speeds of over 100 kilometers per hour, 45 seconds is an eternity. It is the boundary between life and death. While Russian officers were still struggling with layered reports and rigid communication protocols, the opponent had already managed to change positions or deliver the finishing blow. This obsolescence also led to the collapse of military hardware labeled as advanced. The failure rate of Russia's sensor systems and precision cruise missiles reached up to 60%. These expensive devices are frequently jammed or simply cannot keep up with the pace of 21st century electronic warfare. This pushes Russian armored units into a tragic situation. They are advancing in a state of total information blindness. Instead of deploying flexible formations, Moscow still maintains static formations, moving along predictable routes on one-way roads. This complacency led them straight to the gate of death, where TM-89 minefields had been sophisticatedly laid out. T-72 and T-80 tanks, originally designed to withstand head-on impacts, became extremely fragile against induction mines exploding under the chassis, tearing apart the tracks and turning them into immobile fortresses. When the lead vehicle halted after hitting a mine, the entire convoy behind it fell into chaos. They had no information on enemy positions, no timely air support, and were completely disoriented. It was no longer an attack, it was a march into a slaughterhouse. The Russian crews, trapped in scorching blocks of steel, could only wait for the worst to come from the sky. But the opponent's mistakes were only the necessary condition. The sufficient condition to create this horrific tragedy was the sophisticated digital defense network that Ukraine had established to stifle every offensive intention of its adversary. If the Russian army is a muscular but blind giant, the Ukrainian defense forces in Donetsk are a cold-blooded assassin with omnipotent eyes and an extremely sensitive nervous system. The secret behind the tragedy of the Russian armored convoy lies not only in explosives or artillery shells, but in an invisible yet many times more powerful weapon: data. Ukraine has established a battlefield brain network unprecedented in military history. Instead of oral commands via distorted radio waves, they use the secure Link 16 channel, a NATO military data protocol standard. Imagine, while Russian commanders were still struggling to determine coordinates on paper maps, data from Ukrainian reconnaissance drones was transmitted directly to the screens of combat units in less than 5 seconds. This difference in reaction time turned the confrontation into a chess game where Ukraine was always 10 steps ahead of its opponent. The eyes of this brain are high-definition, HD image scanning drones. They hover above the cloud layer, silently observing every movement of the enemy. As soon as a Russian T-90M appears, the AI target identification system immediately marks a red box and calculates the distance accurately to the centimeter. then pushes this data straight into the digital sights of the gunners on the ground. At this point, destroying the target is no longer a battle of wits, but a pure technical process. Lock and eliminate. On the ground, Ukraine staged a deadly symphony with the combination of the triple threat, 3 types of military equipment that turned the battlefield into a literal meat grinder. First are the Leopard 2S belonging to the 33rd Brigade. Dubbed the Elegant Assassin, the Leopard 2 does not rush into close combat. They hide behind ruined farmhouses using 120mm cannons with highly stabilized systems to perform sniper shots from kilometers away. Each shot is a death sentence for the enemy turret. Supporting the Leopards are the durable T-64 tanks of the 47th Brigade. If the Leopard is a sniper, the T-64S are the butchers in the trenches. Using high-explosive shells, the T-64 sweeps away escorting infantry units and destroys temporary defensive structures, creating the conditions for the star of the battle to appear, the M2 Bradley. This is the real meat grinder. With the 25mm Bushmaster cannon's horrific rate of fire, the Bradley shreds Russian light armored vehicles like paper. And when facing heavy tanks, the Bradley immediately launches TOW missiles heat-seeking fire arrows, capable of piercing any explosive reactive armor from a distance of 1,800 yards. But no matter how strong the firepower, it will be less effective without the support of terrain and traps. Ukraine turned the narrow road in Donetsk into a maze of death with a multi-layered mine trap system. TM-89 anti-tank mines were densely laid out in a shark-tooth pattern, combined with cleverly camouflaged anti-tank obstacles. Their purpose is not just to destroy, but to redirect. These mines rip apart vehicle tracks, herding the panicking Russian formation into pre-designated kill zones. Here, every firing angle has been calculated, and every cannon barrel has locked onto its target. The Russian army was no different from animals driven into a tiger cage, where death lay in wait beneath the chassis and above their heads. When the trap snapped shut, the time for tactical calculations was over. That was the moment when the silence of preparation gave way to the roar of hot steel and brilliant orange pillars of fire tearing through the sunset sky. Sunset in Donetsk does not carry the beauty of peace. It carries the color of blood and destruction. In the deadly stillness of a late afternoon, when the last rays of sunlight pierce through the murky gray smoke, the symphony of death officially begins. There are no signaling trumpets, no warnings. There is only an explosion tearing through the air from behind a ruined farmhouse where a Leopard 2 of the 33rd Brigade had been lying in ambush for hours. The 120mm armor-piercing shell hurtles at supersonic speed, shredding the air before slamming directly into the flank of the lead tank in the Russian formation. A brilliant orange pillar of fire erupts, tens of meters high, illuminating the scattered steel fragments. The turret of the T-72 is blown off the hull in a classic jack-in-the-box effect, the consequence of the internal ammunition storage detonating instantly. Do you wonder what the crews following behind felt as they witnessed their greatest hope turn into a giant torch in less than a second? Terror begins to spread like a dose of poison. The lead vehicle is downed, the route is blocked. In extreme panic, the following vehicles attempt to reverse or swerve to the sides of the road to find an escape. But that is exactly when the TM-89 mine trap exerts its devastating effect. Dry explosions ring out from beneath the chassis, tearing through iron tracks, turning giant machines into immobile corpses in the open. Russian infantrymen jump from the armored vehicles hoping to find cover, but they quickly realize they have fallen into the M2 Bradley's meat grinder. The 25mm Bushmaster cannon on the Bradley begins to spit fire. Its characteristic thud-thud-thud sound is no different from the knocking of the Grim Reaper. This intense suppressive fire does not allow anyone to raise their head in time. Incendiary armor-piercing rounds shred the thin armor of troop carriers, while TOW missiles are launched, tracing deadly white smoke trails across the sky to seek out heavier targets. The battlefield at this moment is no longer a fair confrontation, it is a systematic massacre. But the peak of humiliation for Moscow's Iron Fist does not come from heavy cannons, but from the tiny buzzing sounds above. Those are FPV drones, the hornets of death. This is where the economics of war becomes harsher than ever. An FPV drone costing a mere $500 equivalent to a mid-range phone is diving straight into the engine cover of a 4.5 million USD T-90M. The efficiency ratio stands at 1:8,000. You heard that right. With just one precise hit on a fatal weak point where the armor is thinnest or near the fuel compartment, machines, advertised as invincible, turn into heaps of scrap metal in less than 30 seconds. These drones know no fear, no fatigue. They weave through jamming systems, diving into the cockpit, turning each tank into a heated steel coffin. As the gunfire gradually thins, the remaining scene is only a blackened strip of land, strewn with debris of Russian military pride. But the story does not end there. Ukraine does not just destroy, they also carry out a daring recovery operation right under the enemy's nose. Field engineering units entered the death zone as soon as darkness fell. The result was astonishing. 27 relatively intact armored vehicles were towed back to the rear. These machines were brought to makeshift repair shops, where they were enchanted to become Frankenstein's ride. Ukrainian engineers repainted insignias, installed additional cage armor, and most importantly, integrated them into their information network. After only 72 hours, the very tanks that once bore the Z returned to the battlefield, but this time, their cannon barrels were pointed back at their former owners. The presence of these traitor vehicles creates a horrific psychological impact on Russian soldiers. Imagine the ultimate fear when you are attacked by the very type of weapon you once trusted most, by the very vehicles your comrades left behind. That is not just a military failure, it is a total collapse of the will to fight. Russian soldiers now look at every tank on the battlefield with suspicion and dread. Is that a friendly or a ghost from the steel graveyard returned to collect a debt? The battle at Donetsk is not merely a local victory. It is a wake-up call, forcing the whole world to reevaluate the entire theory of military power in the new era. The battle at Donetsk is not just a local victory. It is a milestone marking a great shift in modern military history. As the last wisps of black smoke dissipate over the steel graveyard, a harsh truth has been revealed. In the 21st century, data is more important than steel. Whoever masters the flow of information will hold the power over life and death on the battlefield. The collapse of Russian armored forces before Ukraine's digital defense network has issued a steely warning to every military superpower. Will heavy tanks become obsolete? Perhaps not yet, but they are facing a mandatory evolution. We are entering a new era, one where arms races are no longer about the thickness of explosive reactive armor, but lie in autonomous AI algorithms and the power of comprehensive electronic jamming systems. The sky is no longer a neutral space or reserved only for strategic air forces. Now, it has become the sharpest, most ruthless weapon of the underdog who knows how to employ intelligence. Iron fists will no longer have value if they are blinded before the omnipotent eyes watching from above. In your opinion, in future wars, will massive amounts of steel or digital eyes in the sky decide the outcome? Please leave your thoughts in the comments section so we can discuss them together. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the most in-depth and dramatic military analyses. I am Viet. See you in the next Battlefield Reports.